The State of Crypto is presented by Tron, connecting the world to the power of cryptocurrency.
All right, more legal analysis now for the SBF trial. We're joined by lawyer Kevin O'Brien from the firm Ford, O'Brien, Landy. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thank you.
Now, you're a former assistant U.S. attorney. You specialize in white-collar criminal defense. Of course, we know that Bankman-Fried was found guilty on 7 counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering last night. Were you surprised that we got the decision so quickly?
I was. I didn't realize Kaplan had given them till 8 o'clock and offered them dinner. That your other commentator, I think, wisely pointed out that may have made the difference here. If they'd been let go at the ordinary time, we'd probably still be waiting for a verdict.
Well, I guess that when we heard that last night, that was my initial reaction. Is the judge maybe pressing for a decision now, especially since if they didn't have a decision, we would have had Friday off? Is this the usual thing for a judge to do?
Judges like to move things along. However, especially Kaplan, as you know, if you've ever witnessed him in the courtroom, he's very brisk and he doesn't like having his time wasted. But in this case, it's highly likely we would have had a verdict by Friday anyway. So it's only a matter of a day. It's not like there was a chance that the jury would need the weekend to reach its decision. I think that's very unlikely.
So because it was so quick and all 7 counts, what are the odds of an appeal? Obviously, they're going to appeal, but what are the odds that it would go anywhere?
On the surface, it doesn't appear very likely. That Mr. Cohen's a very able lawyer, and he's got a lot of experience. He's got a very good firm behind him, and they will come up with some issues. But on the face of it, there doesn't seem to be much for them to work with here. Trial was very well tried by the government. I have to concede that reluctantly. And there were some issues. There were some rulings made by the court that can be questioned, such as Kaplan's decision to keep out all that expert testimony. Some of that can be justified, however, and in any case, expert testimony isn't usually that important in the larger scheme of things in a criminal case. In fact, you rarely see defendants call experts. So that issue is going to be raised. I'm not sure it's a material one, though, that would sway an appeals court.
And so how long would that take, though, for him to go through with an appeal in this situation?
Well, it depends. I think at least 6 months. The record has to be assembled. The briefs have to be written. And then there's a delay because the Second Circuit has a backlog like many appellate courts. And they take their time reading the full record and reading all the briefs. So I wouldn't imagine there would be a decision at least until after 6 months out. This is an important case, and it's a complex case, so it's gonna take some time.
Kevin, what's going to happen with sentencing? A tentative sentencing date is set for March 28th, 2024. We, of course, know that Bankman-Fried could face 115 years in prison. What's going to be taken into consideration by the judge when the sentencing is handed down?
Yeah, I should just point out, that 115 years, that's just the statutory maximum for all the counts added together. That's nowhere near, the plausible sentence he would get. I think under the guidelines, these numbers are so huge, you have to keep in mind. And under our federal guidelines, the sentence is really pegged to the dollar amount of the loss. The dollar amount here, the government will argue, is literally off the charts. It's higher than the maximum number in the guidelines charts, which is pretty astonishing. So it's possible that he could get 30 years in prison, but honestly, I don't think that's going to happen. My thinking would be, if you want me to elaborate on that, let me know. But my thinking would be Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, would it be served concurrently? And what are the minimums that he would be facing here?
I'm not sure there are minimums for these statutes. It's a good question. I don't think the sentence is going to be consecutive. They don't usually do that. They're going to be concurrent sentences. If they need to add them together, they will to get to the appropriate sentence. But I would think 15 years, something in the neighborhood of 15 years or maybe even 20 years, on the reasoning that he's a relatively young man. His whole life is in front of him. I don't think the judge is going to want to destroy his chances of having a full and productive adult life. If he did 30 years, he would be in his mid-50s before he got out of prison. I don't think the judge is going to do that. I think he's going to give him a chance to redeem himself, so to speak.
Hey, somebody in their 50s is a young man.
I know.
By the way.
I know that all too well, believe me.
Yeah.
Since I'm well past that date.
Let's chill out here, huh?
Right.
Kevin, FTX made some investments before it imploded that seem to be doing pretty well now. The bankruptcy estate is also doing a decent job at clawing back some of those funds for customers. If customers are made whole or close to whole or 70% whole, will that weigh on the sentencing? Will the judge take that into consideration?
That's a very good point. I mean, I'm frankly surprised the percentage is that high. 70% is a huge accomplishment in a bankruptcy, especially a bankruptcy like this that imploded, that's based on something that imploded so quickly. But if they can reach something like that amount, yes, could make a difference in the calculations of the guidelines.
Yeah, and that's the difference between that and Elizabeth Holmes, where the money just disappeared.
Correct.
And the valuation disappeared. But in this case, there were assets involved that could be clawed back. And she got 11 years, right? The fact that you said, look, the judge is going to look at this as he's got his future ahead of him in the same way Elizabeth Holmes is a mom. Yet we do know that there are people who've committed far less crimes than this who end up with far longer sentences.
Sure.
Is there a possibility that he might look at this and say, you know what, this was a high profile case. I don't want to be accused of favoring some rich kid from Stanford versus what happens to somebody who's born with less privilege. I might have to, go the max. Is that possible? Is that something that you could see Kaplan do?
That's a very good point. And some judges lean that way. I think Judge Kaplan could very well think those very thoughts at some point. He does not like white-collar defendants. He's a little more tolerant of other kinds of defendants, as many judges in the Southern District are. And he can go through the record and find longer sentences. You're right. John Regas, in the Adelphia case, which I was involved with, was a 70-plus-year-old man. And nevertheless, Judge Sand, a liberal judge, sentenced him to 25 years in prison. And he was a mastermind of a complex fraud that brought down the house. And the judge had no difficulty sentencing him to a very lengthy prison term. That could happen again, you're right.
And now quickly, before we go, we know that some of Sam Bankman-Fried's ex-colleagues and collaborators testified against him, Caroline Ellison, Nishad Singh. What kind of sentences do you think that these former colleagues, these former FTX executives are going to get as collaborators with the state?
Well, the key to the kingdom here is to get what's called a 5K letter from the government sent to the judge, which says, this witness, Your Honor, as you might remember, was an exemplary witness who told the truth, withstood cross-examination, and contributed greatly to the conviction of the defendant. And that, and on and on and on in that vein. And these facts should be taken into account in sentencing the defendant. In the federal system, you don't negotiate a specific prison term, but you do negotiate the ability to get this letter, which is a license to the court to really apply any sentence it wants, even down to no prison term. And I think it's at least a possibility that some of these folks may get zero jail time, including Ms. Ellison, who, of course, was a key player in the case. And the theory would be we want to encourage, this case would not have been possible, and I think that's largely true, would not have been possible without these inside witnesses who operated at the highest levels of the companies involved. They weren't minor witnesses. And their testimony led the way to the conviction. We want to reward people like that and incentivize them to come forward in future cases, and therefore we're going to hand out a very attractive sentence under all the circumstances.
Sammy the Bull Gravano can walk the streets, I guess.
You're right, and he admitted to killing people, right? And
yeah, it was more than one. It was like, I think, was it like 20? It was some crazy number.
Sorry, but he was. I remember he was the only witness, real witness against John Gotti. But still, your point holds. If the testimony is considered valuable enough, no jail is a definite possibility, and certainly their lawyers are going to push for that.
All right, Kevin, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining and providing that insight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
That was Ford O'Brien Landy partner Kevin O'Brien.